All right, back again, Fantasy Football Podcast. Time for a 2015 draft review. This is always, the first podcast of the year, and inevitably people get pissed off and say, like, oh, how could you make me a draft loser? How could you make me a draft winner? The answer is I did about 12 minutes of looking over the draft sheet, made a couple of notes, completely unsubstantiated, so don't take it too seriously. Starting actually with keepers in front of the draft, there were some good ones. Oaks keeping DeAndre Hopkins for $11. He's a Hard Knocks hero, but he should be a solid number one receiver. Once Brian Hoyer gets benched for Ryan Mallett. Also, in keeping DeAndre Hopkins, he's got that sense of style. Oaks now has that sense of style as kind of a key part of his team. Maybe some of that via osmosis, fantasy osmosis, might trickle down to Andy and could pick up some pointers and decide to start grooming himself again. Other good keeper, Ben keeping Joe Flacco for $23. Obviously Flacco he's kind of a boring keeper, but he's a good one. I mean, Flacco is definitely an unquestioned starter. He's sort of the top of that middle tier of quarterbacks. $23 is a great price for him. One thing I would recommend keeping an eye on if I was Ben is that, Torrey Smith is gone now. So Baltimore's only receivers are an injured rookie, retiring sociopath, and I think their slot receiver is the cop that choked out Freddie Gray. Billy keeping Jeremy Hill for $11 is a pretty good deal as well, even if he didn't want to listen to my sound logic about acquiring Giovanni Bernard's $24 contract in order to properly secure that investment in Jeremy Hill. But you can't argue with that. This was definitely the biggest, maybe other than Odell Beckham Jr., this was sort of the biggest no-brainer keeper. Lastly, Ariel keeping Ryan Tannehill for $33 is a shrewd move. Tannehill has big-time upside potential as opposed to his wife Lauren Tannehill, who really can only go downhill from here. She's kind of at the pinnacle. All right, worst keepers. It's hard to determine any bad keepers at this point. I would be remiss if I didn't stop to call out Justin's kind of entire keeper strategy over the past few seasons. Obviously he can't be blamed for the Jordy Nelson injury, but he's suffering the consequences of that keeper deal now. We all kind of get to marvel at the supreme payoff of him deciding to keep Pierre Garçon for $19 2 years ago. So this is pretty amazing. Ben is keeping Carlos Hyde for $13. It's not a bad plan. Obviously Hyde is the starter in San Fran, but assigning a 2-year deal to him seems like kind of a risk to me. The Niners are kind of in a total state of flux. It's not inconceivable that Hyde, he might not even be in the team in 2016. He might get injured. That 2-year deal on kind of unproven commodity is a little risky, but regardless, he'll be fine this year. Of course, until the big earthquake carries Levi's Stadium into the ocean along with Oaks' apartment. All right, getting into the draft. Some of the winners of the draft. Start with Kraus, the cruiser, John Kraus. We said the same thing last year, that he was kind of a draft winner, and that was all before Sam Bradford tore his ACL. Adrian Peterson punched a 2-year-old in the face. Ray Rice punched his wife in the face. Deshaun Jackson got hurt. Noshawn Moreno tore his ACL. RG3 got concussion, RG number 12. But Kraus's team this year has a look of a winner. He got solid prices on Tony Romo for $67. He had Julio Jones for only $53. That considering Matt Stafford went for $70 and Demaryius Thomas went for $59. Pretty comparable and obviously saved a few bucks there. Also, Kraus got Terrence Williams to pair with Romo for only $2. He's full-fledged number 2 receiver there in Dallas. He locked up the Buccaneers backfield. He got Doug Martin, who's kind of a preseason sleeper for what feels like the 8th year in a row, and Charles Sims as well. So he got a low price on them. And honestly, the biggest accomplishment for Kraus this year was being pretty restrained in screaming out about the amazing value that's still left at the end of the draft. So good start for John. Next up, draft winner Bootsy. It's kind of surprising that Bootsy drafted a good team considering he was left with money at the end of the draft. He was attempting to throw money at other bidders mid-bid, other owners mid-bid, I should say. He narrowly avoided the QB scare zone by acquiring Carson Palmer from Deutsch. The Hoyer and Fitzpatrick as second stringers is not really thrilling. Where Bootsy really pulled away was at running back. He got Mark Ingram for a modest $34. The Saints look like they're going to be running it a lot this year. And he got a steal in LeGarrette Blount for only $8. And then he backs them up with TJ Yeldon, who could be a total workhorse, and then was able to get Arian Foster for only $12. Obviously Foster's kind of a lotto ticket, but, as Bootsy's pretty strong at running back, it's kind of a gamble he could afford to take. So those are your draft winners. Before I get into some of the draft losers, I should say that there was kind of a draft no contest, and that was Justin. It was sort of, started things off with a classic NBA style move of burning almost $40 for two guys just not to play for him this year. And then kind of almost as soon as the draft started, he blew his wad on Aaron Rodgers, which I'm told is exactly what Rodgers is into. So that led to a pretty quiet night for Justy. He left half his roster wide open, undrafted, and he only spent more than $40 on one other player. So hard to kind of grade this as anything but incomplete. All right, getting into some of the draft losers. Ariel is first up on the list. I know, Ariel, this isn't what you're going to want to hear, but I wasn't too fond of your style in this draft. You actually started off great. You kept Tannehill and you finagled your way into having Brandon Cooks on your roster, even though we all forgot about it. So those are great moves. And then you drafted Marshawn Lynch and Dez Bryant. So your team was kind of looking like a juggernaut. And then Randall Cobb happened. You got trigger happy. You jacked up the price about 300% before half of us even knew he was nominated. Additionally, Cobb's injury status was still up in the air when you picked him. So it's turned out that he's healthy. Cobb will be fine. The price that you paid wasn't really that unfair, but you went from 0 to 60 real quick. I think the price was like $7 and you just screamed out 45. You'd think that a Jew of such lofty status as yourself would just have slightly better negotiating ability. Spending $57 on CJ Anderson seems like a bit of a stretch. Don't forget Monty Ball was top tier running back last year and he totally bombed out. I speak from experience. Anderson is definitely the riskiest of the big name running backs. You burned $4 on Jimmy Garoppolo, who now is nothing but the best looking bench player in the NFL with the Brady suspension being overturned. And your only other quarterback is Marcus Mariota. He's a rookie who even Roger Goodell doesn't know his name. So, you're definitely in the QB square zone. Your QB scare, I should say you're squarely in the QB scare zone. And you did yourself no favors. So, next up on the list of draft losers, the host, the Montana kid, JP, Jason Plotzker. Your draft strategy to me was just as random and unknown as your apparent obsession with German culture. I'd say that you have a touch of Stockholm syndrome, but you'd probably loudly correct me that it's Stuttgart syndrome or something like that. So, similar to Ariel, you had a good start. You have some good players. Antonio Brown obviously is a monster. I think Jarvis Landry is could be the sleeper of the year, and you clearly wanted him, and you went after him and got him. So that's nothing wrong there. And actually, you're honestly in pretty good shape at quarterback with Cutler and Andy Dalton, who they might be the butt of NFL jokes in real life, but they can post pretty good fantasy stats. Where things start to go kind of ugly fast is your running back situation. You spent $30 on Joseph Randle, who has had every opportunity to seize the Cowboys' starting job from the porcelain man Darren McFadden and hasn't done it yet. To put that in perspective, clear-cut starters Alfred Morris and Latavius Murray went for 34 and 27 respectively, whereas he spent 30 on Joseph Randle, who's really in just kind of a clear timeshare. Then you risked $13 on Amir Abdullah, which could turn out great. He's been the preseason rookie darling, but then you let Deutsch get Joique Bell. So if Abdullah gets hurt or his extreme college fumbleitis follows him into the pros, you're kind of SOL. The only other backs on your roster are Danny Woodhead and Reggie Bush, which might be fine if this were a PPR league being played in 2011, but not so much here in reality. The last draft loser, I kind of struggled putting this guy on the list. His team is not really all that bad, and there were some other nominees. I mean, definitely, I had a pretty kind of ugly draft when I overspent on Blake Bortles, but kind of counterbalanced that with getting a pretty good steal on Roethlisberger and kind of spending wisely late. Smith, burned his budget keeping Luck and really only had enough cash left to get Alex Smith as a number 2, but also made some good moves late. Billy really couldn't capitalize on the major steal that he has in Jeremy Hill, but the rest of his team ended up all right. So, the last official draft loser is Andrew Dennenberg. The rounds out the list for really one specific reason. $18 on Keenan Allen. It's woof. This guy is, Keenan Allen, again, I speak from experience. I had him last year. He's a guy who, he was fully healthy. He played with a Pro Bowl quarterback last season and could only put up 783 yards. He's allergic to touchdowns. Similar to Plotzker's running backs, Dennenberg has kind of drafted the 2012 All-Star wide receiver team and Vincent Jackson, Larry Fitzgerald, Deshaun Jackson, and Keenan Allen. He got some late value in Eddie Royal and Charles Johnson, so he might not be totally screwed, but good luck with Keenan Allen. All right, that's pretty much it for the podcast this week. As I recommended, don't look into these awards too closely. Similar to the Coolies, there's not a whole lot of research that goes into them. I'll do my best to get back to the old format of running through power rankings and doing matchup previews every week, as that seems to be the format that's kind of easiest for me to produce. One last note on the draft itself. Pat yourself on the back as you're listening to this. Great job, everyone. I thought it went really well. It was pretty smooth. Maybe that's because it was a Sunday and not a Saturday, and we weren't getting blind drunk about halfway through, and we didn't have some naked whore holding up the draft by giving ass-centric lap dances. So good job, everyone. It was fun. It was good to wrap up this year's draft at Montana, and please join me in praying for a second year of Krause's injury palooza. All right.